Europe was standing resolutely in support of the Iranian nuclear treaty. That was the defiant message coming from European capitals since the killing of Iranian General Soleimani on January the 3rd. Now, French President Macron, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Prime Minister Johnson urged Iran to withdraw all measures that were not in line with the nuclear agreement. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called out the U.S.'s allies over the weekend, saying they had not been as helpful as he wished they could be. So exactly what are the attitude of European countries? Are they standing with the U.S. on the deal or not? And how much of a big deal is this? Can the nuclear deal be saved? Joining me for the discussion from Tel Aviv is May Jonathan Sacerdoti, a Middle East analyst here in the Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies, and via Skype by Jonathan Sacerdoti, a British commentator and broadcaster. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So before I came into the show, the latest just came in, and I have to ask you guys for what you know as the latest. For instance, it's said that France, Britain and Germany formally triggered, reportedly, the dispute mechanism in Iran's nuclear deal with the world powers on Tuesday, the strongest step they have taken so far to enforce the agreement that required Iran to curb its nuclear program. Professor Cui, what has been the newest that you have heard? Is this something that we should be paying attention to?
Yes, exactly, because as we know, regarding to the situation now in Iran, and especially some more escalation between Iran and the United States. Now, European countries, I think, are facing a very, very difficult situation because they are trying to keep a balance. On one hand, that I don't think they agree with these actions or behaviors from Washington against Iran, but they do not have some influence enough to change the idea of Mr. Trump. On the other side, they try to keep Iran in the deal, but what's the conditions for Iran to keep itself in the deal? And the European side try to do something, especially in a diplomatic way. But now there is not so much space for diplomatic behaviors. So I think perhaps once there are some more escalation between Iran and the United States, there will be some space for European countries, but not now.
Exactly what has happened that has put the European countries in such a difficult situation? Basically, before I come on the show, they were still quite defiant. They still said it is for instance, Merkel said everything must be done to save the nuclear deal, and Russian President Vladimir Putin described preserving the deal as tremendously important. By the way, Russia has not said that it wants to trigger the dispute settlement or reinitiate any negotiations. So the position of Russia is still unclear at this moment. So what has happened that has put the Europeans in such a difficult situation and actually swayed some European leaders to change their mind? For instance, the British leader said that they want to join the United States to negotiate a Trump deal. Mr. Jonathan Sacerdoti.
In terms of what's brought this situation about, the reason why the Europeans have started the trigger process is because Iran recently announced that it had removed limits on the production of uranium. It had removed the limits. It hasn't actually started producing uranium at high levels of enrichment, but it has now given itself the permission. It has allowed itself now to enrich uranium at higher quantities and perhaps also higher levels. And this is something that's against the JCPOA. Why are the Iranians saying they're doing this? They believe that the Europeans are not living up to their part of the deal. The Iranians want the Europeans to invest more in Iran's economy. But the problem here is this. European governments cannot force their companies to invest in Iran. After Trump withdrew from the deal, European companies were faced with the choice of either invest in Iran or lose your business transactions and investment opportunities in the US, or keep the US and lose Iran. And this is a choice that many companies also abided. They had no choice. It just made sense to stay in the good books of the United States, because the US economy is much higher.
I understand that that rationale. It has been a very difficult choice. Basically, European business is caught in the middle between a rock and a hard place. But what has happened over the last few days, if not hours? I wonder what has happened, because before the Germans, for instance, the German leader, the Russian leader, and the French leader, they were quite unanimous in their defiance to try to hold the deal together. But just hours ago, news broke that, for instance, the British one is switching side and want to help the United States to renegotiate a Trump deal. So what has happened over the space of just a few hours? Mr. Sacerdoti, probably.
Well, I think we're looking at Europe and the UK, even on its way out of Europe, being led by the nose, by the United States. And many around the world will be happy about that, because perhaps it's time, certainly according to the Trump administration, that a hard line was taken with Iran. Let's just think back to the aggressive actions that Iran has taken, even just in relation to the United Kingdom, where I am now. The seizure of the Stena Impero, the continued imprisonment of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, just to name two things. Iran does behave aggressively towards other states around the world, and so far it's done so with a degree of impunity until the killing of Soleimani, because that showed that perhaps America is now taking a new position, a new stance, and one that does make the Iranian regime afraid. And President Trump has also spoken out saying that he says that Iran should not harm any of the protesters. Remember, they killed something like 1,500 protesters only in the last few weeks before that strike. Now they're much more afraid. Their retaliation, the much feared World War III that people were saying would occur because of Trump's actions in the Soleimani strike, well, that turned out just to be something that didn't kill any troops. It hasn't yet been as terrible as those skeptics had said, and I think that Europe is realizing that perhaps they need to fall in line with America.
That number of a few thousand, of over 1,000 people being killed, I think needs to be verified. At this moment, I'm not able to verify that number, so I wouldn't know whether it is true or not. But that's not the focus of our discussion. Professor Cui, following the answers of the other two guests, what is your reaction? Do you think that the blame is on Iran squarely, that they have finally withdrew from the pact, or they are to blame for having done something that made the U.S. to strike General Soleimani, and thus really, putting the situation into an impossible shape?
Also, after the action, taken by United States against General Soleimani, United States tried to, claim this gentleman as a terrorist. I think it's a very, very useful, instrument to convince some European countries to believe that, okay, it's maybe a right behavior by United States to do something to kill one of the terrorists. Especially, we can find out, especially from UK, because UK, not even not now, even last year, as we know, when UK, when British people, when the local government detained oil ship from Iran, it showed a very small step by British government to change its original stance and to, give some more cooperation with the United States. But now I think that the major focus, I think, if we try to find out some more actions from European countries, will not be UK, will be decided by Germany and France. As we know now, Germany, very interesting visit by Chancellor Merkel in Moscow. I think now it's time for European countries to try to know something, especially how much effort from Russia to give to the European countries to support the deal. And also another, I think, President Macron always tried to help this dialogue directly between Iran and the United States. But I'm not sure now, because now the biggest question for Europe is it doesn't have the capability enough to influence every side.
Do you think France and Germany will continue to do that, or are they going to say, okay, you know, now let's send this deal to its grave and maybe renegotiate a new deal? Professor Cui, very briefly.
How to play as a balancer? I think now it's time for European countries to know which side is way. I mean, from Washington and Russia or some other. So I think they will make a choice soon, but after they understand what's the real situation.
Mr. Zhao Denfa, your forecast for the near future, is there going to be a very heated discussion among European leaders themselves as to what to do in order to proceed with the deal, either to withdraw completely or to try to savor it still?
Well, in terms of the British stance, I think what has also brought, if I may add, what has brought Boris Johnson to state that Britain should follow the American model is that there are now calls in Iran to expel the British ambassador because he was seen at a ceremony commemorating the mistaken downing of the Ukraine airliner, the accidental downing, and he just went to a ceremony in Tehran, and then 15 minutes later he was arrested. And now there are people in Iran calling for his expulsion, and this is really angering, I think, the British people, the British government. In terms of what's going to happen in the future, look, end of January is a very important deadline for Iran to accept all the conditions of the Financial Action Task Force against financing terrorism, which means Iran would by the end of this month, have to approve the Palermo Accord, which is against money laundering. If Iran doesn't approve it, it's going to be impossible for French and German businesses to do business with Iran, even if the sanctions didn't exist. If Iran doesn't approve these anti-money laundering laws, which we've been waiting for more than 2.5 years, it will be impossible for these countries to do business with Iran anyway.
Mr.
So we have to look out for that. I think that's going to be an important landmark.
Okay, Mr. Sacerdoti, I have about 20 seconds left for you. What is your prediction for the future, for the near future?
Well, I think that certainly in terms of Britain's position and Europe's position, it will need to shift more towards the US position. And I think possibly it's about time that that happened, because Iran has for too long known that it can act as it wishes and get away with it.
All right. Professor Cui, finally, in terms of Russia, in terms of China, also critically important parties to this deal, what are they going to do?
I think still for China and Russia to try to keep the deal alive. But of course, I think for China and Russia, they need to also understand, especially recognize that what's the situation for European. Once some European countries will go into the same line with Washington, I think it will give a very big change for the situation, for the deal, and also further Middle East situation. I think at that time, China and Russia also should try to, make some changes.
Well, I think I'm a little bit personally involved because I spent 3 years in Europe covering, the negotiation of this deal. I saw how many days and nights everybody spent. Unfortunately, it seems that it's unraveling before our eyes. Anyway, we have to leave it there. We'll keep a close watch on the situation. Many thanks to Zhao Denfa, Professor Cui Hongjian, and Jonathan Sacerdoti joining us. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.